Krishna ma'am, whose work continues to shape the future of environmental and cultural conservation, not just in Kenya but across Africa. Born and raised in Kenya, she has always been deeply connected to her roots and the environment around her. She is currently the Strategic Initiatives Director at Malyasili, role through which she guides strategic efforts for environmental and community-based conservation across Africa. Salisha ma'am is also the co-founder of Kenyans United Against Poaching Movement, which is a grassroots initiative aimed at combating wildlife poaching in Kenya. Her journey took a pivotal turn in 2012 when she left a successful corporate career to focus on what truly drives her, and that is conservation. She believes in the power of community-led efforts and sustainable solutions, blending her entrepreneurial spirit with a passion for nature. Her leadership extends across diverse areas, including human-wildlife coexistence, measuring impact and conservation, and sustainability of community initiatives. One of her notable achievements include leading the coordination of an Africa-wide strategy to protect vultures whose populations have faced drastic declines in recent years. She has also been a part of the leadership team of Lion Guardians, focusing on safeguarding lions and fostering human-wildlife coexistence.
Her work extends beyond lions and vultures. She has consistently explored sustainable and novel solutions for community-led conservation efforts. Salisha ma'am is a proud member of the African Conservation Leadership Network, a network that brings together leaders dedicated to the wildlife and conservation across the continent. In the recognition of her work, she became a Kinship Fellow in 2022, an honor given to the conservation professionals who demonstrate leadership in implementing innovative and sustainable practices. In addition to her on-ground work, she holds an MBA from the London Business School as well as MPhil in Conservation Leadership from University of Cambridge. With such an impressive background, it's no wonder she describes herself as a rebel with too many causes. And we are excited to learn from her today about her experiences, challenges, and the innovative solutions she has championed. We request everyone to please join us with a big round of applause in welcoming our guests to please come forward and begin with the long-awaited interaction.
As I said, it's been a long journey for me in this sort of space. And I started, and I want to say this to all of you here, because, you know, when we're in this space, when we're in school, we have ideas of what we may want to grow up and be. And some of us really know, right? We know we want to be that doctor or veterinarian or engineer or banker or business person. We know, or we think we know. I thought I knew. I thought I wanted to be a genetic engineer. Right? I thought I was going to sit in labs and think about mutations and biology and all of that stuff. But my life took very different turns. And that's all I want to share with you, is that where you are in that moment, you grab that opportunity and you go for it with all your might. It's always going to be a learning experience. So I studied a mix of humanities and social sciences and computer science and finance. I worked on Wall Street at JP Morgan for a couple of years. Then I said, this is enough. I did my MBA and I moved into strategic consulting in the UK. And I did my MBA, I worked there for a couple of years, and then I said, oh, I don't really feel it. Like I'm working, I'm earning a lot of money, doing well from a successful money perspective, but I was not feeling very fulfilled, right? And so I decided to quit, and I started working with my brother hand in hand, kind of turning around businesses and focusing on businesses and being an entrepreneur, and working with my husband Yash, who's sitting in the corner there, who's also led a very interesting life. And yeah, so that happened, went through that. And then when I went home, so this is 20 years later, I went home to Kenya, and it was after a particularly difficult time for both Yash and I. We hadn't done very well in a business, and we were kind of starting from scratch. And when I went home, I kind of realized what my calling was. And so, all of the stuff around environment and conservation has always been my calling. I just never really knew it. Till I went home, I sat and I thought, how can I use my skills, right? Strategic, financial, business, entrepreneurial, not conservation biology, which is the typical route for someone in environmental conservation. So I actually sat there and I said, I want to use my skill sets, make a difference, and let's see how that goes. I was in my mid to late 30s, and nobody was interested. They're like, who is this girl, right? This woman. She's not young. She doesn't have a research or a degree in conservation. How is she actually going to be useful? And so I struggled. I looked for many jobs for like 3 months. I applied for everything, got rejection after rejection or no response. And finally, someone said, oh no, you can volunteer with us. So I got a volunteer job. And that's where I founded Kenyans United Against Poaching. So my entry was around communications, advocacy, activism. And I'm really thankful for that, to be honest, right? I'm so thankful because essentially that taught me a very vital lesson that I wouldn't have learned had I entered the conservation world through a more sort of international NGO, big NGO, like maybe you've heard of World Wildlife Federation, WWF, Conservation International, or any of these big NGOs, right? I learned the essence of conservation is the choices that we all make every day. That every one of us is a conservationist. It's just the choices that we choose to make. It doesn't matter whether you can track a lion, you can understand their biology. What matters is what you do, right? And linked to that, and essentially linked to that, is that our local communities, indigenous people who have lived on these lands for decades in coexistence, as you said, so not tolerating wildlife, living with wildlife, living with nature in a way that everyone is thriving for generations, is where the solutions lie, where the impact is happening on the ground, right? So I don't know if you've heard of these stats, but about 75% of the earth is impacted by us as humans. If you think about how much of the earth is water, that tells you a hell of a lot, right? We have a disproportionate impact on this earth for the type of species we are, right? We are what are called super predators. We have occupied a space, and our activities, whether it's development, whether it's in terms of urban rural development, mining, oil, all the things that we feel we need to live have a very big impact on this world. But there are local communities, there are indigenous people who are living in concert as opposed to clashing with the environment. So we know it's possible. We know it's happening, right? I have visited, I have been a part of many such solutions and seen them actually work. And so the work that I do now is really focused on how do I support local communities, how do I support indigenous peoples to actually be recognized, have their rights, have their agency, to live the way they want to live and express themselves, right? That's called self-determination. So they actually determine how they want to live as opposed to being forced. So there's a history around conservation, right? There's a history around exclusion. There's a history around communities being kicked off their lands. So I don't know if anyone here has heard of the Masai Mara. Anyone? No? Okay. Don't be shy, hey? Like, talk to me. The Masai Mara is a world famous UNESCO heritage site, right? It's a national park in Kenya, as well as what is called a national reserve now. And essentially, that's fine. They're doing their thing. I hope you can still hear me. Yeah? So this heritage site was where the Maasai, who are these long, lean, tall people who came into the Rift Valley of East, through East Africa down into Kenya and Tanzania aeons and aeons ago. And that was one of their sites where they lived. They're pastoralists, which means they're nomadic. They go with their livestock herds and they graze their cattle, and they lived in coexistence. They lived with lions, they lived with all sorts of wildlife: buffalo, cheetah, leopard, wildebeest, you name it. So they lived like that. But then somebody from the UK, basically our colonial masters, decided along the way that they wanted to preserve this land. They wanted to preserve the lions for their hunting, actually. It wasn't really preservation. They wanted to keep hunting. And they decided they needed to cordon these spaces and make national parks. And so the genesis of national parks is really about disenfranchisement and alienation of local people from their lands, local people from their customs, right? These are things that we consistently are kind of, as I said, I'm a bit of a rebel, so, the words I use are also a bit rebellious. But these are the things that we have been fighting against. We've been championing for local communities. And the work that I do now, I look for local communities, I look for indigenous peoples and their organizations, and I help strengthen them. So I'm using all my skills: strategy, finance, communications, marketing. And I have a deep interest in biology and ecology. So I've learned along the way how to track a lion, how to identify a lion, right? They have very unique, for those of you who have cats, you'll know this, they have something called whisker spots. And it's like a fingerprint. So the spots on their whiskers, both left and right, will help you identify a lion, right? I've walked with the Maasai, with the indigenous people of the Amboseli system. It's this amazing ecosystem in Kenya underneath Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the highest freestanding mountain, tallest in Africa, in the world actually, freestanding. And it's this unique landscape where humans and wildlife continue to live, and the lion populations have actually gone, they've gone from, 1 or 2 for every 100 square kilometers, so that's a lion density metric, to now over 7 times per 100 square kilometers. So it's grown 7 times in the last 10 years, all because of communities choosing to live their lives in coexistence. So that's the kind of solutions. And I know they exist in India as well. There are many of them, right? 36% of the lands that we live on are actually under indigenous people and local community stewardship. Some 20% of forests. So they have a very unique role. We sit here and we say the climate is changing, right? It's either too hot, too cold, too many floods, extreme weather events happening more and more frequently. That's climate change. But the resilience that these local communities are building. So when I say resilience, I mean they're building the ability to to bounce back, right? Adapt solutions, right? The way they dig for water, the way they conserve their forests, that all has an impact on the carbon that is being absorbed, right? Because if carbon is not being absorbed, if we're cutting down trees, which are, the lungs of our earth are the trees and the seas. So if we're polluting, if we're putting things into the sea, if we're cutting down trees, we are reducing our Earth's resilience, our Earth's ability to remove carbon that we are also creating through pollution in many different ways, including plastics. And yeah, so we're reducing that ability. And so with local communities, and I'm sure you've heard this or seen this, or maybe heard it from your ancestors, your forefathers, the stories of how they lived. So there are sacred forests in Meghalaya, right, in northeast India, sacred forests. And the way they think about it is you cannot go into that forest and take something from there. You can go, you can, be one with nature, you can observe, you can do the rituals, but you cannot cut anything. You cannot take anything out of there. These types of indigenous ways of being, these are ways of being. We don't want to call them conservation because it's too limiting. It's actually their way of life. But it is harmonious and peaceful and at one with nature. So yeah, that's what I do these days. I do that work. I support these communities. I support these things, and I still work with Lion Guardians. And I try to amplify their voices. I try to support them to have more recognition so they can get the money, the support that they need to do the work for all of us, to save all of us, really, to save our futures. Yeah, and that's been my journey. It's been very sort of like this. But yeah, so I found my calling when I was almost 40 years old. So I just want to say there's always lessons that you learn in life. And you just have to kind of go with that opportunity that presents at that point in time and make the best out of it. And that each one of us has things we can do every day, right? That will make a difference. Turn off the tap. Don't keep it on while you're brushing. Water. Don't ask for a plastic straw. Refuse the straw. Minor. Of course, we don't want to put all the onus just on us as individuals. We need change happening at industrial levels. So what we call systemic change, right? And we need to influence that. But the choices, as I started, the choices we make every day have an impact on this world that keeps us alive, us breathing, us healthy, right? And the more we affect that web of life, right? Everything is connected. We are also a part of nature. We're not apart from nature. Yeah? We like to think of ourselves as different, but we're just human animals. The rest are non-human animals. Same thing. We are a part of this world, and that's what I want to leave you with. Every one of us is a part of this world. Every one of us can.
In India, at the rural level or the countryside, the concept of conservation and single-use plastic, no-use plastic is not widespread. So what are some steps that we can take to actually aware them of this cause?
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, I mean, I think plastics get a lot of share of market, as they say, voice, right? Because it's something that's easier to start with. But I don't know, do you have a wildlife club or an environmental club here? That could be a start, right? You can start locally, start in your space. As Yash was saying, I think you all are from here. So it's your responsibility as local citizens to make that change, to make a difference. And that's what I say. You might think, oh, I'm only a school student, what difference can I make? But if all of you come together, you raise awareness, right? You talk to people, you try to understand what is the motivation behind the use of plastic, right? Or why do people, are afraid of the word conservation? If you understand what is the motivation, then you can affect the change, right? When I was in high school, I was So at that time, I don't know if you guys have heard about poaching, but basically poaching means killing an animal and using its parts, right? So ivory, which is elephant teeth, essentially tusks. There was massive poaching in the 70s. And actually, Kenya had banned hunting, and were trying to preserve the elephants who were dying in masses, being killed for their tusks, for something that was like functional to them, that they needed every day, and that was ornamental for humans. And I joined a march, right? I started walking on the streets of Nairobi with other fellow students, other citizens, and saying, no, we want to protect our elephants. So these are the kinds of things that you can come together and say, what can we do together, right? What awareness can I raise? What information is missing? Why are people not aware? What can we do differently so that they are more aware? And then maybe what will help them change their behavior? How can we make it easier for them to change their behavior, right? Do we make at JBNSS eco bricks? I think you do, right? Maybe talking more about why you do that, how they can use that. These are things that you can do individually. So it's like start small and then go from there. Every person will make a difference. But understand the motivation. Understand why is it difficult? What's stopping people from this? And sometimes you'll be surprised. You'll have this conversation with someone on the side of the street and they really, really care. It's just that there are certain barriers that are stopping them from, being able to turn that care into an action. Yeah?
And Salisha, Salisha and Yasha family, I think you didn't know that part of the this thing, or do you know? Do you know the Salisha and Yasha family? Huh? So Yash is my son and Salisha is my daughter-in-law. So now I'm going to request, officially I'm going to request Salisha to be connected with the school and online to become a guide for us, for conservation, for living the life that you want to live, and that for guiding the students who want guidance as to what they want to do in their life and how to go about it. What do you think of this? Do you think it will be useful? So please give a resounding clap for this. And I would like to, Joshi sir is here, I would like you to find a way that we can make Salisha our guide for the students.